Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's council meeting. Mayor Piercy is in Salem on city business, and so as council president, I get to sit in today in her stead. We have one item on the agenda for today, and it's the council subcommittee's work on street assessment policy changes. And so we're going to hear from the staff first, and then from the subcommittee. So Take it away.
So I'm also John Reese, city manager, is at a climate conference in Washington, D.C., so I'm here in his stead. And I'm just going to actually turn this over. I think most of the people here at the table, and maybe a lot of people at home, know Mark Schoening, our city engineer, and Fred McVeigh. And they're going to just kind of walk us through this presentation and have a conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Council President Clark and members of the council. So we're pleased to have this opportunity to walk through the work of the Street Assessment Committee, the subcommittee of the council, which was formed in late 2009 and included Councilors Taylor, Solomon, and Poling, who all worked very diligently in a very focused manner in developing, in walking through the issues and developing a set of recommendations that for issues previously identified by the council, and that we'll go over today. And I wanted to, so Fred and I are going to share the presentation duties and the question and answer, or the answers later on. And Fred and I were the staff persons involved in supporting the subcommittee. And I wanted to state at the upfront that the recommended changes to the city code would be, if they are moved forward and implemented, they would be for future projects. The charter precludes the council from retroactively implementing any changes for that section of the code related to assessment. So it would be for projects from this point forward. So that one of the first things that the subcommittee did was, based upon the council work session in March of 2009, was to develop a charge for its work. And the charge reads to review the existing Eugene Code on assessments and the inequities in the code identified by the City Council, and develop recommended changes in the code for the consideration of the City Council. And again, this was formulated by the subcommittee based upon the discussion that the council had at previous work sessions on assessments. And also from those previous work sessions were the issues identified by the council, and this is where the subcommittee focused its work. So there was two aspects of street assessments related to financing for property owners. One was the payment period. Currently it's 10 years within the city code. And then deferral of assessments until the sale of a property. There were two concepts in redefining the set of properties that would be included in a local improvement district. The travel shed approach, which would include additional properties that frequently use or rely on a street, and then also the inclusion of properties along cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets intersecting the street to be improved. And then the third issue was related to individual property assessment methods and centered on the variability and equity of assessments for residential properties. And then in addressing these issues form the basis of the subcommittee recommendations that we're going to go over today. So one of the tools that the subcommittee used was values and criteria as a way to objectively assess the different options that were being reviewed, and as a final check on those as we developed the recommendations. So this was just a set of values and then some of the criteria that were used for each aspect being considered. So the first element was the financing issues was extending the payment period. In a method of allowing longer payments already exists within the existing code, and this was used on a couple of projects last year, where in the ordinance that levied the assessments, the payment periods for the Maple Elmira project and the Old Cooper Road Chad Drive project were extended to 15 years through the adoption of the ordinance levying assessments. So the subcommittee felt that there was already enough flexibility within the existing code to extend the payment period, so there was no change recommended in the existing code. And then the next item is the financing issue that the subcommittee reached consensus on was to allow deferrals of assessments with limitations until the sale or transfer of a property. And the funding mechanism identified for such deferrals would be the existing funding that's available for other assessment deferral and subsidy programs. And then similar to these other programs, it would be dependent on the availability of funds. And other limitations would include that property owners could obtain a subsidy if qualified, or a deferral, but not both. Deferrals would be limited to owner-occupied single-family or duplex properties, and any sale or transfer of the property, such as a transfer of trust, would also trigger the payment. And then while not a policy recommendation, it was noted that because deferrals result in a lien on a property, if someone is to refinance their property or their mortgage, it's likely that a bank would require that lien be paid off. So it wouldn't be part of the code, but it's a likely consequence if this was moved forward. And then to the local improvement district boundary related issues, after examining a number of examples and considering the complexities involved in attempting to identify a travel shed for streets being improved, the consensus recommendation was not to move forward with the travel shed approach to identifying a local improvement district boundary because it was too complex. Let's see if we can. And then the next one was cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets. And the subcommittee did reach consensus on a recommendation to include within local improvement districts lots along cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets that intersect the street being improved. Lots assessed along the dead-end streets would be those that must access a larger street network via the street being improved. And then elements of the recommendation included assessing those lots on cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets the same rate as those properties abutting the street to be improved. And this also eliminates the existing assessment distinction for primary access for corner lots that would be on both the dead-end street and the street being improved. And then recognizing that street connectivity and lot configurations can change, that the determination of a dead-end street would be made at the time a local improvement district is formed. And then finally, unimproved dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs should normally be improved along with the unimproved street to which they connect, with their improvement costs being shared within the LID. And so that last one isn't so much a code change as a policy informing future local improvement districts. And then some of the implications of this is that assessments on lots on dead-end streets depend on the scope of a project. Dead-end streets can have multiple branches and tiers. Properties on dead-end streets may pay for multiple street improvements over the course of time. And then equity across the city, in that it's there's going to be a wide variability depending on if there's cul-de-sacs or not on a particular street. And so we'll illustrate each of these policy implications in the next couple of slides. And in hindsight, a lot of these examples are from the Crest Drive project because we had a lot of the maps already done, and there's a lot of good examples. But I didn't want to give the implication that, as I said at the outset, this is any changes would be from this point forward. It's just Crest is a good way to, the streets just are a good way to illustrate some of the policy implications. So one of the issues is that what constitutes a dead-end street depends on how you the scope of the project. So in this example, if this portion of the street was being improved, then the only dead-end street is this piece here. But if we go to the next slide, so in the previous slide it was this portion of the street, but if we include this portion of the street too, then this becomes a dead-end street because the only way to get out is either to this street being improved or this street being improved. So the issue here is if, depending on what the scope of the improvement project is, can change what streets are dead-end streets. And then the other issue is that a dead-end street, or there can be multiple branches of a dead-end street or multiple tiers. So in this case, this cul-de-sac could be improved as one project. This street, Loma Linda, could be improved as a project, and this street, Crest, could be improved as a project. So if so, the folks on this cul-de-sac could be paying for the cul-de-sac, Loma Linda, and Crest at different times. And this was the policy recommendation that if you looked at a local improvement district, that if you were going to improve these two streets, that you should improve all of these streets at the same time, so you don't run into that issue of several tiers that get improved over the course of time, and that this would all be one improvement project, and all the costs would be shared by the folks on the major street and the minor streets. And then, oops, let's see, is this going to go backwards? So then the other issue on this particular case, if you can see these highlighted lots in yellow, is that Loma Linda this cul-de-sac is currently improved. And so at the time this little subdivision was developed, the cost of that street was included in the price of the lots or the homes. And so this cul-de-sac attaches to an unimproved street, and a year ago this was an unimproved street. So in this case, these property owners, the property at some point in the past or over time would incur multiple costs to improve the street they abut and the street that they connect to. And then another issue was the variability in the number of properties that could be included in across the city, depending on what the street improvement was. So in this example, this is Jefferson Acres, and there are no dead-end streets. This is the unimproved section of Jefferson Acres, and there are no dead-end streets or cul-de-sacs that connect to this. So adding cul-de-sacs and dead-end streets into the boundaries of a local improvement district wouldn't have any impact on or any effect on Jefferson Acres. Or in this next example, this is Arcadia Street. So under the existing code, the properties in brown would be those that are assessed, but all of these properties over here, all of these streets get access via Arcadia. So these are all dead-end streets that would then become part of this larger local improvement district and share in those costs. So at this point, I'm going to transition over to Fred, and he'll talk about the individual property assessments methodology.
So there was another set of recommendations around individual property assessments, and the subcommittee's primary focus for this area of issues was considering a uniform single-family residential lot assessment. Under the consensus recommendation for the improvement, a street serving only single-family developed lots, all lots benefiting from the street improvement would pay exactly the same and share equally in the assessable costs of improving the street. Unfortunately, not all local improvement districts and streets are that simple, and so we had to look at a number of other related recommendations, implementing recommendations that are included in this slide. The recommendations included that both single-family dwelling and duplex lots would be assigned one residential assessment unit, or is abbreviated on the slide as RAU. multifamily development lot assessments would pay a multiplier of the residential assessment unit. The subcommittee agreed to that. That vacant residential lots in particular, would be assessed based on the minimum dwelling unit density requirement of the lot zoning. So we had a solution for dealing with vacant lots. And that implementation of the residential assessment unit approach be based on an initial apportionment or dividing of the total costs of improvement between residential and non-residential properties. Now, that was a consensus, and we're going to get into a little bit more detail on some of the implementing issues where there wasn't full consensus in a bit. If I can get our technology to work here. Oh, there we go. So before we get into some of those details, just some policy framework implications of the recommendations. Obviously there's a move away from frontage as the basis for residential lot assessments. That doesn't completely answer the detail of what do we do with non-residential lots, and we'll get into that a little bit. And there's some other finer points of the current assessment policy whereby we create things we call delayed assessments, and those were equity factors that are included in our current code. So under a uniform residential lot assessment, lots that are currently defined as partially developed, these are residential lots that are half an acre or more in size. Those lots under the current code are subject to a delayed assessment for a portion of the frontage if they have more than 100 feet of frontage. The uniform residential lot assessment recommendation would eliminate that form of a delayed assessment. We would continue to have vacant lots greater than half of an acre subject to delayed assessments. At least so far, there's no recommendation to change that provision in the code. And just stating it simply, developed lots of all sizes would be assessed at the time of LID, either under the residential units or the unit for non-residential, which is currently front footage. The consensus recommendation to implement a uniform residential assessment led to the need for two other implementing elements for. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Two other implementing elements, and there for which there wasn't full consensus. The first, the subcommittee, while they agreed to use a per multifamily unit multiplier of the residential assessment unit, there wasn't a consensus as to the numeric value, the specific value of that multiplier. And so two multipliers were identified for use by the subcommittee. 0.25 or 4 multifamily units per uniform residential assessment, or 0.35, which is closer to around 3, just a little under 3 units, multifamily units per residential assessment unit. The staff recommendation during the discussions with the subcommittee was the use of a 0.25 assessment unit, because generally it moderates a shift that we would see in costs for multifamily lots under the current assessment, front footage assessment. Generally, we'd see an increase in costs for those types of lots under the residential unit assessment approach, and the smaller multiplier moderates that cost shift. And then also, just from a general simplicity and of understanding and public understanding and acceptance, a 0.25 multiplier happens to result more often in a whole assessment unit being applied to lots. The second element of the individual property assessment recommendations without full consensus is related to the fact that a per lot residential assessment requires that initial apportionment of total assessable costs between the residential lots and non-residential lots within a local improvement district. And two primary methods of apportionment were identified. There are a number of different ways to divide costs up, but the two primary ones that the subcommittee discussed and focused on were in proportion to the total lot area. So the total lot area, the proportion of that's associated with residential lots would be the percentage of the total costs that are borne by residential lots within the LID. The portion of total area associated with non-residential lots would be their percentage. And then the other method is just based on frontage, which we're very used to using and dealing with in local improvements these days, proportion of frontage. Staff recommended use of proportion of total frontage since it is more consistent with the current and or past policy and practice. And it maintains a consistent basis between apportionment and the non-residential assessment unit, again, assuming the staff recommendation was supported. It's also seen as more stable and less likely to change. The frontage of a lot is less likely to change than the area of a lot because of lot configurations, and there are mechanisms for changing lot configuration relatively easily that would affect the area of a lot more frequently than the frontage of a lot. And it also would tend to moderate the impacts of very large assessable and non-assessable lots, which is the subject of the next couple of slides. Whoops. Well, I'll just jump right in. The two policy implications around that, very large lots. This is an example of a very large area assessable lot. Again, in the sort of hypothetical example of Crest Drive, the Morse Family Farm would bear a higher street assessment based on area than it would based on frontage. And it would bear a significantly, proportionally larger cost based on area than frontage. And then in the case of non-assessable lots represent city costs, city-borne costs of the share of the improvement costs. Again, if this hypothetical project included the frontage along this particular cemetery, that lot would constitute a very large non-assessable lot. And you can easily see that proportionately that the area of that very large lot would create a large city cost and share of the project cost in relationship to what it would be if that lot were included in the LID and the assessments were based on frontage. So the apportionment topic is a little complicated, I guess. But it does have some effects, and it's generally staff perspective, and I think the subcommittee generally would agree that having consistency between the method of apportionment and the method of assessing lots by size for non-residential lots is seen as desirable. It's a lot of what we're assuming here is that if you apportioned by area, you would assess by area for non-residential lots. Or if you apportion by front footage, you would also assess by front footage, as we currently do for non-residential lots. So we've attempted to give you a quick overview of some of the details of the recommendation, and I'll second Mark's comments about the subcommittee being very focused, diligent, and in a matter of 4 or 5 meetings, we covered a lot of detail. They saw a lot of these maps and looked at a lot of scenarios and developed some. All of the primary recommendations got to consensus on. It was just these two really implementing details where there was a lack of full consensus. We've tried to present some of the aspects of those details that the council may want to consider in providing direction to staff to move forward. The questions really are, does the full council support the subcommittee recommendations? Do they accept staff recommendations on those 2 items of implementing details? Or do they have other direction related to street assessment policy? And assuming that the council, full council supports moving forward, we'll go to work on a draft ordinance to change elements of the Eugene Code Chapter 7 dealing with assessments. We've tentatively scheduled, just to keep it on the schedule or get it on the horizon, a public hearing for November 15th, and then, of course, following that, whatever the council's judgment is, action on a final ordinance after that. That's the staff presentation. I think we're going to defer to the council subcommittee members to add their comments and or clarifications and move forward with that. And we're at your service for questions.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Sarah. I thought we'd let the subcommittee have their input here as well, and we'll start with Betty.
Thank you. It was an excellent committee. I thought we worked hard. We, as you said, we stayed focused, and we had good staff support. And you certainly have the right not to support what we came up with, but we put a lot of thought into this. You should have a good reason. You should have a good reason, yes. As for and I hope that we will vote on the 2 parts separately. The part that we had, actually, it was more than consensus. We had unanimity on the recommendations, and I hope that we'll vote on that in one motion. And since I get to make the motions today, maybe we'll do that. And the others, we didn't come to agreement on, and we need to do some discussion. But I think this is a big step. If you adopt the things that we are recommending, it's a big step forward. I wish we could quit assessing property owners altogether. I don't think it's the right way to do it. I feel really sorry for the people who have to pay the assessments, and I feel especially sorry for the people whom we can't help because of the time that we're doing this. But I've been concerned about this injustice for almost 14 years now. I remember the first year I was on council, there was a man who was 92 years old who had to pay to have this alley improved. He didn't even use the alley. He didn't even have a gate to it. And he was told, well, you can take 10 years to pay. And I thought, oh, it's wonderful. When he's 102, he might be out of debt. I assume he's not around anymore. I don't know. That was 13 years ago. But I think that this is a step toward greater justice for people who live on the roads that are being assessed. The cul-de-sac thing, and the dead ends, they are people who can't get away from home without using the road that's being improved. And in some cases, I know in Crest, people who are most demanding that we do something don't have to pay under the current rules, and yet they couldn't go anywhere without getting out there, without getting out on Crest or Story or Friendly. And it's only fair that if you can't go anywhere without, if we're going, the whole thing is unfair, but if we're doing it by assessments, it shouldn't be just the abutting properties. One big step forward that we've made since I was on the council, we stopped calling them benefiting properties. Staff used to say the benefiting properties, and we have changed it to abutting. Sometimes it's not a benefit at all, sometimes it's the opposite of that. But I hope you will definitely support the ones on which we agreed, and I have my opinions on the others. Thank you.
With 1 second to spare. Good job, Betty.
Oh, how
Jennifer.
Well, thank you. It was really a very interesting committee to work on, and I too want to thank staff for their hard work. And I was so impressed by how just simply adding dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs to an LID really helped to dilute the impact to the different homeowners. And I'm sorry you didn't put the slides up for Maple and Elmira, but that would have made a really significant difference in that particular plan, and as well as the Crest Drive maps that we looked at. So it just seems so much more fair, and I just, remember the agonizing testimony that came before us in the public forums and the hardships for folks, and I just really think, like Betty said, we can't eliminate that, but this will certainly mitigate the impact. And I thought we had a very thoughtful discussion, and I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Thank you. George gets the last word from the committee.
Thank you. I agree with what Jennifer and Betty have said about how this whole process went and the support that we got from the staff. What I would like to remind people is that the vote we're doing today is for a recommended or a proposed ordinance that will go to public hearing before we take any action. So this is just the first step. So when we're talking about voting on this or voting on that, it's just a starting point. The areas that we couldn't agree on unanimously, we had some good discussions, and there's I think one of them I said, I could go either way. Let's throw it out to the rest of the council. I think it was a reference to 0.25 versus a 0.35. To me, let's hear what everybody else has to say on that. So I was real pleased. I would like, can you pull up the slide that you showed of the Jefferson Road project? And I had some questions. I don't know if we're going to be able to see it on this map or on this display or not, but it looked like there were different, maybe some flag lots or some.
No, not that one. That's our.
That's okay.
That one right there.
Yeah.
I really can't tell, but it looks like there's perhaps maybe some flag lots there that have real small stretches of property right up against the road. Well, one of the changes that we're recommending on this kind of makes that more equal out to all the property owners, because if you look at the overall size of the property, they're all going to be about the same size. Yet what they have is a driveway size lot that would have been assessed based on the frontage rather. So I think this kind of spreads it out a little more evenly. And the same thing, and I think Jennifer was mentioning it, that and we actually looked at one of the areas in Andrea's ward where, okay, so we're going to start an LID to upgrade this one street. And then there's all these other little dead-end streets. Well, by looking at the entire area and maybe increasing the size of the local improvement districts, we're actually trying to get at two things. One, we bring all these unimproved streets up to par at the same time, and two, it spreads the overall cost of the project to more people. And three, is it not true that sometimes the larger the project, the less it costs sometimes?
That's correct.
Because you're buying in bigger quantities or spending in bigger quantities. So, in the long run, I think there's a triple benefit to some of these areas. So, I, like Betty, hope that we can vote on the ones that we've agreed to unanimously, and let's take the ones that we couldn't agree separately.
Thanks, George. I'm going to put myself in the queue here first because I have a couple questions, and I was hoping to maybe that the subcommittee could address those if they want to have another round of talking about this. I want to vote in favor of the subcommittee's recommendation because you did a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of this that I like. There's one aspect of it that really troubles me, and I didn't hear in that discussion a way to address that, and the issue is over the dead ends and the cul-de-sacs. And for me, it seems arbitrary, and it doesn't seem fair. Just the idea that it spreads the cost out over more people doesn't seem to make it fair to me. And I guess then my first question will be to the attorney. and it's this. Could you put up slide 11, which is the second map? So it occurs to me that based on project sequencing or project scope, you could end up with, if that's not 11, I'm sorry, the one that
Slide
had the second map.
Oh, that would have been crust?
Yeah, the
Press
crest
correct,
stuff.
Slide 7, the one just before the one you had before.
Yeah.
Where'd it go? That one?
No.
No, keep going. Back to this.
Oops, I'm going the wrong way.
Keep
That's the
going
very beginning.
backwards.
Ooh. No, no.
This is backwards.
Backwards, yeah.
Yeah.
2 more.
That one.
Keep going. Nope, all the way. Okay. I'm sorry. I think you were there for a second. Thank you. That's the one. So these folks that live in here, that first map you showed included what if you did this street. And if you did this street, only these folks would pay. These folks wouldn't. But if you did this one and this one, these folks would pay, and all through here. And so would these folks. But if you did apportions, you could end up with a project where some people pay multiple times, as you mentioned, and whether or not people pay becomes a question of whether or not you include a street right next to it or whether you don't. And that seems kind of arbitrary to me as to who you're going to charge. I don't understand the underlying principle involved about whether someone has to pay or whether they don't. Because if it changes based on how you scope the project, it doesn't quite seem fair to those folks. And I guess another part of that question is, on what basis does someone owe or have a liability for participating in the LID? If it's because they have a property there, that this fundamentally changes it for me, because it says those people who live on a cul-de-sac had to pay initially when if they live on an improved cul-de-sac. When their street was built, they have to pay, but then when another street is improved, they have to pay again, and maybe even another time if another street that traps them in is improved. And that just seems fundamentally unfair. Do they pay a different rate if they live on a dead-end street or a cul-de-sac initially, or are they paying multiple times depending on what we do here?
I'll take a crack at it.
Okay.
So in this example, the properties on the cul-de-sac would have paid when that cul-de-sac was improved.
Did they pay the same rate as everyone else who lived on a standard street or another
Well,
street?
in a cul-de-sac like that, whoever developed that subdivision would have paid for the improvement and then apportioned the cost to the lots, and it would have been in court, part of the
Same
lot
as a
sale.
straight street.
Right. But if we, while we couldn't codify it, the goal would be that when you develop a project, is that you look at this network of streets that become dead-end streets, and you consciously develop a project so that you don't end up assessing a particular street time and time again. So you would develop this, if the project was to improve these 2 streets, then you'd consciously include all of these streets and improve them at the same time, and all of the costs would be accumulated and divided among all the properties. However, the properties on the cul-de-sac would in essence, they would have paid when that cul-de-sac was developed, and then they'll pay a second time when all of these streets are improved.
And that, to me, seems fundamentally inequitable. The other part, too, I just wanted to say for the record is that I'm not going to be in favor of us bringing unimproved streets into the city and without a plan to improve them, so we don't have to have this fight in the future.
If I can address your question, is,
And then Chris.
and the streets that, Mike, that we were looking at were the ones that are already inside the city. They're not the ones, we're just trying to figure this one out. Man, I forgot what I was
How
gonna
are they not paying twice?
Yeah, well, in the example that you're using, that's why we're suggesting that when we go into an area that we look at developing the local improvement district to include all the rest of them. The reason why we're doing this is because even though it may have been improved at one time when it was initially built, such as this cul-de-sac, the only way that those people can get in and out of the area is by benefiting on the the improved road on Crest Drive. So it only seems fair that if, in the long run, they're actually benefiting from the improvement that was done on the unimproved street, because they're going to end up having to drive on it anyway. In other words, they can't get out of their neighborhood now without driving on an unimproved street, but if we go in and fix it, they're benefiting from it. So that's the reason why we decided to include the cul-de-sacs and the dead ends.
Arbitrary?
Did you, they're not paying twice for the same thing. They're paying for the construction of the cul-de-sac, and then they are sharing in the cost to improve the street that their property accessibility is dependent on. So it's not, if they were paying twice for the cul-de-sac, I think that would be more what you'd be concerned about with the, double payment, but they're not. It's actually two separate things.
I'm over time here, but my question to you is about arbitrary based on the fact that staff can choose the scope of the project and whether they get charged or not.
It's not an arbitrary, it's what I'm hearing from Mark and Fred was that in scoping this, they would attempt to be as equitable as they can by not having, like, leaving out Loma Linda, so then of the actual improvement, even though all of those streets, all of those properties would have to pay for the improvement to Crest and the others, they would have to pay again if Loma Linda was then improved. So what they're looking at is, okay, what are the boundaries of the streets that are being improved, and do the ones that fall inside also, so you don't have assessment and assessment and assessment for those properties within the area.
Can I just speak to the LID part?
Chris is in the queue here, but this is a little freewheeling. I hope you'll beg your indulgence here just a little bit. Yeah.
I was just going to say, don't forget, it's council that actually approves the LID, so I think that sort of removes the what you're maybe fearing about arbitrariness, because we can rein it in, or we can make them step back and take a bigger approach like this.
I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can actually do overlapping boundaries for local improvement districts. And that's an example. Say you're only going to do the part of Crest Drive as one project, and then later do it another one. You're not going to overlap, and because it's going to be a completely different district. So when we form the boundaries of the local improvement district on one project, if we come back 2 years later to do another one, we're not going to be able to overlap those boundaries. I don't think, are we? That wouldn't be. I don't think we'd be allowed to do that.
Right.
Chris? Thanks.
This is actually relevant to the question I was going to ask, which was similar to Mike's, but more from the standpoint of getting clarification. So let me leap all the way to the outcome that I would want. What's the best possible outcome? What I would want to see in whatever assessment system you set up and whatever LID process you set up would be an instance where what would not happen would be, I'm in my home on Loma Linda, and we're improving Crest Drive and Story Boulevard. I wind up paying a full residential assessment, and there's no bulldozers in front of my house, and there's no pavement laid down. That's the worst outcome. That's not what I want. Because that means later on, when you do put bulldozers in front of my house and you lay pavement down, I pay my assessment again, and I think that's what we're trying to avoid. What I'm looking for clarification on is what you're saying is that would not occur. If I pay an assessment, then there'll be bulldozers in front of my house and there'll be pavement laid down. And we'll create the LID in such a way that if I'm paying an assessment, there's going to be a bulldozer in front of my house and pavement laid down. You'll add streets or move streets or reconfigure streets in the new LID to accommodate the fact that you're doing a larger assessment. Therefore, we have to improve more streets in this unit in order to make it work. But what I think I'm hearing you not say is no one will be charged an assessment and nothing happens on their street, and they're simply being assessed because somewhere further out is a street that they have to use, but there's no bulldozers in front of their house. That you're going to craft the LIDs in such a way so that when these improvements happen on these main streets, anybody who is now part of the LID and has to pay the assessment is also going to have bulldozers and pavement. It's going to be a larger project, and it's going to have to take all this into account for the figure. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, well, two pieces to that. One is we didn't see a way to codify that, but that would certainly be the intent in the
Okay.
policy, more from a policy basis, that we would do that. Someone could, for example, in this example, the person that lives on the cul-de-sac, which is already improved, isn't going to see a bulldozer in front of their house, but they're going to be part of that local improvement district that pays for the improvement to the street that they need to use to get to their house.
Well, I thought I heard that when you did the street, cul-de-sacs along that street would also be improved at the same time.
If they're unimproved.
If they're unimproved, right, but most cul-de-sacs, by their nature, they're already improved.
Okay. So
So
you
the-
don't anticipate it just simply because of the nature of how cul-de-sacs are built in the first place?
No, my point is that most cul-de-sacs are improved, but a lot of them tie to unimproved streets, as in this example. So they're not going to see any bulldozer in front of their house, but they're going to pay for the street that their cul-de-sac intersects because they need to use that street to access their property.
Could there be instances where you would be improving the street, not improving the cul-de-sac, but charging a full assessment with the knowledge that within X number of years, you will have to be in there with bulldozers, and they will have to pay an assessment again at that time?
No, I think that
Alan, I had
if
a related question when you get a chance.
I got you in the queue, Alan.
if the cul-de-sac is unimproved, it would be part of that, the goal would be it would be part of the project. And then the city would maintain it afterwards.
Okay, so we're assuming that cul-de-sacs are developed enough that they wouldn't require bringing up to a standard the same way that the street along the way had to be. Okay, that's kind of one of those assumptions that you're operating under. Also, and that's, those are the things that I really want to be clear on, is what are the operating assumptions here? And if the operating assumption is cul-de-sacs, because of the nature of how we're putting this together, are not going to wind up getting charged twice, that's okay. In other words, I don't want somebody to wind up having to pay two complete assessments for only one construction. And I like the residential unit idea, and if there's a way to fractionalize it or in some way recognize that there's no bulldozer in front of the house, but they are still responsible, maybe you could work with components of an assessment. And the last piece, very quickly, is when we talk about the city being responsible for helping to underwrite the cost, the city pays for about half the cost of the street when it's improved, right?
Generally, yeah.
And the city is representing the people of Eugene. So in other words, the city all the properties in Eugene are paying for that street through the city's half of that assessment. So nobody's getting off scot-free, but the neighbors with the bulldozers in front do logically need to pay more. That's one of my assumptions. Everybody else may disagree with it, but
It's not what's happening.
okay.
George Brown. Mayor, do you want to take over the
You
chair?
can go right ahead, Mike, it's fine. I'm just going to try to
This is
catch
weird,
your
but we'll
conversation.
work with it,
I know it's
okay.
weird, but we'll work with it.
If you want in the queue, just let me know. George?
Don't push it too far.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you. Could we go back to Jefferson Acres Road slide, please? Okay, it's a little hard to tell because the overhead lights are on, but I see there's a couple places where it looks like there's three flag lots. One to the north of the one in front of it. And then each one would just have like a driveway to get back to it. Currently, and that's is unimproved street?
Yes,
Currently?
yes.
So the current policy is, help me out.
The current,
The first street
Yeah.
gets charged a full share, the first house. The second house in the queue, does they only have a driveway?
they're all separate tax lots, so they would pay a minimum of 50 feet of frontage. So if the pole on the flag lot is 10 feet wide, they'd still pay for 50 feet. And they pay a maximum of 100 feet of frontage. So if they're 110 feet, they'd only pay for 100 feet of frontage. And if there's some between 50 and 100, they'd pay for whatever the frontage was. That's the current
All right.
method.
So it looks like that would, with these recommendations, that looks like to stay the same.
Well, this is a good example for the residential assessment unit. In this case, every lot would pay the same cost.
No, I think it's good. I think it's great. Thanks for that. And my other question is more like one of the ones where there wasn't unanimity. The second one, not the RAUs. residential assessment units, but the per lot residential and this apportionment between residential and non-residential, I was kind of interested in for the same reason, like, say, like commercial lots on Flat Drive, somewhere like that, someplace that will happen in the future that we don't even know about. Let's say there's two developments of equal area, but one goes north-south lengthwise, say it's a strip mall, and that's only 100 feet wide. And the other one is the exact same shape and size, but flipped around 45 degrees, so it's got like 300 feet of frontage. Do they pay the same frontage? And then we're drawing the same amount of traffic, theoretically. People down that street. Is that, would one only pay for 100 feet and the other one 300 feet? Does this section address that? I mean, I think I picked it right.
No, you've got it right. They would pay. The development potential would be a little bit different based upon, with that extreme example. But they would pay different assessments based upon their frontage. Or if it was based upon area, they'd pay different assessments because their areas are different.
All right, so that's what people didn't agree on, right? Which way to
Right,
go there?
right. But that problem exists with going either way.
Yes,
in the example
I
that you
see it,
gave.
Sure,
Yeah.
I see it. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Can you turn him up a little bit, Andrew, there?
My question is related to the same as Chris's. I wanted to make sure that cul-de-sac table, the way it was written, it kind of made me think that if the cul-de-sac was not done at the same time as the street and were unimproved, then later they came back and did the cul-de-sac, they'd get charged twice.
Right. No, the intent would be that you would do those at the same time.
Okay. Can you imagine the circumstance where that wouldn't be the case?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good. That helps the question I had. Otherwise, I'm supportive of the proposal. I'll go back on mute.
Thank goodness.
Andrea? Yeah, I see George. Thanks.
Thank you for this presentation. I appreciate the work the staff has done. This has been an interesting conversation throughout the years. And thanks to the subcommittee. I appreciate the work that you did. And I really don't have any questions except for the one that just came up in my mind. If you look at a lot of the cul-de-sacs, they don't have sidewalks, and that's the preference of the builder at the time. So I guess my question is probably getting into the minutia is, so like if you're doing a local improvement district on Jefferson Acres, it's a collector, you're putting curbs, gutters, and sidewalks, and then if there were a cul-de-sac and they didn't want curbs and gutters and sidewalks, would they still pay the same amount theoretically for their improvements? Because that's that's my understanding anyway, and if you could explain that to me, that'd be great.
We'll work it out and have a
Right. So, it would be the council decision whether or not to. If the majority of the you would look at the improvement district as the cul-de-sac and the other properties. So it would be if the majority wanted the full project. That's what would go forward, and then the council would make the decision on whether to move forward with that project as it was developed, or you could at that point exclude the cul-de-sac, but it would be with the full knowledge that at some point in the future you would exclude the cul-de-sac from the improvement, but not the assessment, with the knowledge that if property owners change their mind in the future, then the issue that Councilor Zelenka just mentioned and Councilor Plyer said could happen, but it'd be more at the choice of the property owners than at the choice of the council.
Okay, so I don't know if I was clear. So cul-de-sacs generally don't have people walking through them in a round circle.
And so so it would be at the council decision making point that we would say to staff, okay, I know you've gone through your diagram and you've wanted to put curbs and gutters and sidewalks in the cul-de-sac, but it really doesn't make sense. So just curbs and gutters and the improvement to the road would be appropriate. Is that how you would want to work this part of it? Or I don't know what other members of the council feel like, but just a lot of people, there's a lot of cul-de-sacs in our neighborhoods, and I could see assessing them for the improvement, but what I'm curious about is if you're just taking the full cost of the project and dividing it per person in that LID or per property, however you want to describe that, or are there actually going to be like variances, like if the main road gets curbs and gutters and sidewalks, okay, we assess them one price, and then if it's the cul-de-sac and we're just upgrading their road, we're making it an improved road, but we're not putting sidewalks, we're just putting in curbs and gutters to the sewer. So, I'm just curious about that aspect of it.
Yeah,
But I support everything generally, I'm just curious.
If that was defined as fully improved, so we weren't going to come back in the future, then everyone would share equally in the cost, whether you were on the cul-de-sac or the full or the intersecting street.
It is possible to have a variable assessment for the types of improvements that are associated with individual lots. So while everyone may share in the overall cost of the main street improvement and maybe even the paving and curb and gutters on the cul-de-sac, there could be a special or separate assessment element for, I want my driveway apron improved along with the street, or I want additional sidewalk or special benefited features. So in assessment principles, it's possible to do that, and the council could direct that as part of the formation of the LID.
All right, thank you.
Got myself in the top of the second round. My challenge is still the one that I brought forward, and I think I heard Chris trying to get at what I'd said, but I'm not sure anybody answered him with the thing that he said. If you accept the principle and the premise that if you live on an improved street, you've already paid for it either in the value of your house when you bought it, or if you moved into it brand new and that's what it cost when the road was built. If you accept that principle that an improved street is something you've already paid for, then if someone lives in an improved cul-de-sac that is trapped and landlocked by an unimproved road, that person on that improved cul-de-sac will be paying two full assessments. Isn't that correct?
The way, as you described, that's true. And that's a change from the current policy, and that was part of the discussion of the subcommittee.
And I think just the principle that they drive on that road, or they happen to drive, or they have to drive on that road, for me, I haven't heard anything that overrides the inequality that they have to pay twice. I don't think that principle does it for me. Betty's second in line.
There is so much inequality in the whole thing. We can't get rid of all of it. But if they bought a place where they have to drive on have to drive on a road that was unimproved, they're benefiting from getting it, and they should help to pay for it. Actually, they're benefiting more than the people who live on the road, because they're just getting a good way to get away from home. The other people have to put up with all the construction, maybe lose some trees, and lose part of their frontage, and so it depends on, that's something they should have thought about when they bought a house that only had access to the rest of the world through an unimproved road. There's no way we can make it all absolutely fair, but this is a lot more fair than it is. And we're going to run out of time.
Yeah, well, we have half an hour. I want to get through. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 in the second round. Can we do that, or should we put the
Could we do the first motion?
I can do it real quick.
First.
All right.
And then I think most of that we can still discuss it.
Go ahead and put the first part of the motion. Yes.
Yeah, just keep going with them.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion. I move to approve the consensus recommendations of the subcommittee.
I'll second that.
Okay, we want to have a second Or do we want to retain the same, we'll retain the same order here, I guess, for the...
Only if they're discussing this part.
Yes.
Otherwise,
I'm going to look to the people who are in the queue if they have specific discussion to the motion, otherwise they can pass. George Poling.
The only thing I was going to bring up, and Mark already mentioned it, was that these LIDs do have to have approval by a majority of the property owners. And that's all I was going to bring up.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I would just say quickly that I appreciate the conversation. There's an enormous number of moving parts here, and I will certainly support this, but with the expectation that we're moving forward and there may be some additional conversation, particularly around the notion of the cul-de-sac issue, dead ends, and whether or not there is some traction in the idea of fractionalizing REUs to recognize special circumstances. Not giant stuff, but maybe some things we can use to help fine-tune this.
Thanks. Jennifer?
Well, I was going to try and speak to your issue about the cul-de-sac, but I think I'll leave it at that.
Andrea?
And I just wanted to add in that, whenever these LIDs come in front of the council, we can modify it in any direction we want.
Yeah.
And if there's an LID that is like almost there and the people in the cul-de-sac or the barrier, there's nothing to say that we can't, change it to whatever the specifics are of the issue. So I'm going to support the motion.
Did Alan want in there?
Alan?
I think we
He's
lost
on
him.
mute.
Okay.
Mayor, did you want to weigh in on
I
this
just
at all?
want to be sure you...
I think we've lost him.
Yeah, I think so too.
I'll say that I'll support the motion because we're only at stage one, but I won't support the ordinance without some alteration to this, what I think is an inequality. So all those in favor of the motion? And I get to vote, too. Alan, are you there?
No, I think he's
Okay, that's 7 in favor. On all those opposed, 7-0. Is there a second part to that motion you want to make?
I move that the RAU be the .35035.
Second for purposes of discussion.
Jennifer?
Move to amend to .25.
I'll second that.
All right.
Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment to .25, raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? 6-1. Now, for that as the substituted amended motion, all those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Do we have other business there? Is there any part of that wasn't passed? Because
Yes. It's
Yeah.
The commercial, whether it should be area or footage, and I think George's example was an excellent argument for making it area. It should be according, and the Morse family farm too. You showed it's so huge. Well, it generates a lot more traffic than any house. So I think it would be only right to have it area rather than frontage. George gave a really good example of this small frontage paying this.
did you want to make the motion on that?
Yes, I move that we use area rather than frontage for commercial assessments.
Second for purposes of discussion.
Discussion. George?
Well, I think I'll support this. I don't know if it'll pass or not, but there again, I mean, we could maybe wait till the next one appears where this is actually a real occurring event. And then we can sit down and look at it, and we might want to do a combination of the two. I mean, I don't know that each LID has to have ironclad rules that you just like, there may be some segment of it that we could change that would be beneficial for everybody, but we go, no, we can't do that because the ordinance says no, we can't do that. I think, we should be flexible with these things and striving to be fair, but it's kind of like a flag lot, It's like you're paying, you have a weird shaped lot and you only have 20 feet of square footage, but in back it's like huge, and there's a few places like that on West Lot. I think there's some in Coburg too. So, you just have to be sensible. Some common sense on this thing.
I'm of two minds on this. staff weigh in on what this does to city budgeting and to city costs? Because as I saw there, that, for example, I think the large lots that where the city would share tend to be fairly, could be fairly involved, like the cemetery example. So how will that change project budgeting and the impact to the city budget?
Well, it'll on some projects it won't make any difference at all, like Jefferson, for example, which is all residential, and others it could make a big difference. I mean, one of the reasons we suggested frontage is that it's more stable in that the frontage along a street doesn't change. I mean, a lot can be divided, but the frontage along the street is essentially the same, whereas where the area can change over the, so if you looked at the Morris family farm, for example, it can be accessed from several streets to the north. So from the time a local improvement district is formed and construction is complete, that lot could change in size. It could get dramatically smaller through a lot line adjustment, which would then change everyone's cost from the time the local improvement district was formed to the time it was assessed, because the area within the local improvement district changed.
Thanks. Jennifer?
Welcome back.
Is there a maximum assessed frontage on commercial or on non-residential?
No.
I guess I might be willing to consider. No, I'm not. I want to stick with frontage because area, and this became very clear to me looking at a map of Bethel Drive. There are a lot of large lots on Bethel Drive that attract no traffic. They have no impact whatsoever on the use of that road. And there are other lots, smaller lots, that do attract a lot. So there was a huge inequity when you started, in my opinion, when you started assessing based on area versus frontage.
Thanks. Chris?
Wow. Yeah, I'm really up in the air on that. I can absolutely understand why the committee had a hard time with it, because this is really a tough one. I can see absolutely reasonable arguments on both sides, and that's what makes it so tough. So maybe my question is, are we anticipating any improvement districts that would involve commercial property anytime soon? Is this something that's real time critical and we have to do it right away?
No, I don't think so. I think in the current capital improvement program, I think Jefferson Acres is the only project that, and perhaps Bertelson and from 18th South, which I think is, there might be a grocery store or a mini mart, but I think most of it is residential. So no, nothing in the next several years.
Yeah, I mean, I will apologize to my colleagues. I am so up in the air on this. I don't know which way to vote, and being asked to vote today on it really makes me feel uncomfortable that I'm just going to arbitrarily say yes or no, and that doesn't feel right. Do we have to vote on it today? Would there be some way we could? I don't know. I don't necessarily want to table it to further. I want to take some time to think about it. So maybe just not vote on it at all today. I don't know what that looks like. How you do that in a parliamentary way, but. My inclination then, if I have to vote, would be to vote no, just as a safeguard, not that I like or don't like. I just would vote no as a way to not have to make a decision. I hate saying that.
No.
I do too. George?
I would just like to point out that this is not the final decision. It's a starting point for the public process. I'm like you, Chris. Either way, I can see equal arguments from both sides. So I'm willing to support Betty's motion just to get it out into the public process and then base my decision on what I get back from that process. In the long run, it might be that I change to, I don't like that. Let's go to the, back to the frontage.
Okay. Okay, that's good.
And I'll insert myself there to say that I'm in an exactly similar position where I can see the arguments for both sides, and so I'm going to default to the staff's recommendation. So I'm going to vote against Betty's in order to support the staff recommendation if that comes forward as a motion. Jennifer?
Thank you. And if you saw the maps that I just described, like, for example, the one on Bethel Drive, you would come to the same conclusion that, and if we look at a couple of potential future LIDs, you can see for yourself, because these are locations that you know what these folks do at their businesses. And then for costs, well, no, I'll leave that for a later day. Yeah, so I'm sorry. My point was, would you please be sure to bring your maps for that discussion on the commercial non-residential lots? Thank you.
Betty?
You could look at other neighborhoods and other maps and come to another conclusion, and we don't know what's
And
going...
we did, didn't we?
We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We do need... And what we do, though, is we are not finishing this today, but when we do, it'll be in effect for a lot of years, and the bad effects as well as the good effects.
This feels really strange.
I know.
Mayor?
It's all right. We can manage this. I just wondered if because of listening to you all, if a motion that said I know that, as George said, it will just, if you vote yes, you'll just keep the discussion, you'll open the discussion up. But if you really don't want to give the message that you are supporting it, which you do if you do thumbs up, you could put a motion in place that said we move this along for further discussion, which doesn't actually limit you to a yes or no, but just says we want to keep talking about this one. I've just put that out there as a maybe a way for you to say it's worthy of discussion, but I'm not ready to weigh it in yes or no at this point.
So then would the motion be to take both options into the ordinance to the public hearing on the non-residential properties?
Unless you think you need a discussion at a work session kind of way before you take it to a hearing, which I don't. That's your question.
We could prepare two, so you'd have two alternatives that you take to a public hearing.
It would allow us to move forward with two.
Okay. I'll change my motion to that.
And I'll second that.
Everything was done friendly and in a nice conversation. Wasn't that nice? All those in favor of the adjusted motion?
Friendly.
All those opposed? Unanimously again. Well done.
What's left?
Thank you. Is there anything left, or are we done?
I have.
Mayor, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
You have a couple of minutes. I'd like to inform you about the meeting that I just left, which is why I was late, which I was up at the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting on putting together the act. As you probably know, there was a proposal put forward by the Board of County Commissioners, which is not the same proposal that you voted in support of. You voted in support of the proposal that was made by what we call the FACT LC, which was the group that was to recommend a bylaws proposal to the Board of County Commissioners. The difference between the two proposals essentially was in the FACT LC proposal, they advocated for 6 citizen members, and they advocated for the act to appoint the 6 citizen members. The Board of County Commissioners proposal was 10 citizen members, and they would appoint all of those. And those are the two different proposals, but the one that was before the Oregon Transportation Commission this morning was only the Board of County Commissioners proposal, because that is what the legislation asks for. And the only thing that the Oregon Transportation Commission could do was to say yes or no to the Board of County Commissioners proposal, because that is what they were asked to address. Mayors, including me, went to talk and express the position of our cities. And the conclusion from the Oregon Transportation Commission probably won't be a surprise to most of you, but they basically said, go back and work on it some more, and come back in November, and that you need to come up with something that has some broad support behind it. And so please go to work. We really don't want this to have to be solved by the legislature. We really want you guys to get it together and get it done. So would you please go back and work on it? So that's the way it is right now. So just let you know.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. Any other business? Thank you.
County got spanked.
It sounds like we have